The history of Britain has often been shaped by war.
Oh, again, that crunching noise is where you hit the bone.
That's bone. Our ancestors fought to defend their land, their cultures and their beliefs. Constantly getting driven back here. Sometimes against invaders like the Normans and the Romans, and other times against their fellow countrymen. I want to put myself in their shoes, to find out what they ate, which weapons they used, and how they lived.
Forget your chivalry. This is life or death.
And I'm curious to learn more about the key battles in British history to discover how they've influenced our past and our present. So I'll be meeting historians, archaeologists, and weapons experts to find out how 6 critical battles changed the path of this country. On England's south coast, the town of Hastings attracts millions of visitors every year. One of the main reasons for this is the big event that took place in the region nearly 1,000 years ago, which changed Britain forever. This is Pevensey Beach on the south coast of England. In 1066, a vast invasion fleet from France landed here. Their leader was William, Duke of Normandy. William believed he had a claim to the throne of England and was willing to take it by force. The Norman invasion fleet of 776 ships and 7,000 men landed on the 28th of September, 1066. You might think that such a vast army would be met with a massive English defence, but you'd be wrong. William of Normandy and his army marched ashore without opposition and set up a garrison near the town of Hastings. Before landing on British shores, Duke William had been victorious in multiple battles, including defeating King Henry I in the Battle of Varaville. But what made William think he had a claim to the English throne? The throne that was occupied by Edward the Confessor for 24 years. Historian Geoffrey James has the answers. At the beginning of the year 1066, Edward the Confessor is the King of England. He's gravely ill, but has no children, has no heirs to the throne. So what is the political situation?
Well, he didn't have an heir, so really that throws the country into a crisis. Harold Godwinson, the most powerful man in England, Edward the Confessor's right-hand man for many years, was the strongest man in England, bar none. The family effectively ran the country. He was the richest man in the country too. So Harold was pretty much on a roll.
Harold Godwinson wanted to be king, but he had a problem. Edward the Confessor had already promised that he'd support William of Normandy to be his successor.
In 1065, Harold Godwinson gets shipwrecked in Normandy and ends up at the court of William the Conqueror. Purportedly, Harold gives an oath of allegiance to Duke William, saying, I promise you when Edward dies, I will support your bid for the kingship of England. In those days, of course, you know, swearing an oath on sacred relics is...
That's legitimate. That's about as legitimate as it gets. Worse still, there was a third person with a claim.
A guy called Harald Hardrada, the King of Norway. He had family links back to the period when Canute, the Danish King Canute, had been King of England, so he did feel he had some rights.
So there's 3 of them. You've got Harold, William and Harold, an Anglo-Saxon, a Norman and a Viking, all vying for power. I mean, this feels like it's a recipe for war, isn't it?
There's no way this was going to get resolved without a major battle.
When Edward the Confessor died, Harold Godwinson ignored the pledge made to William of Normandy and took the throne instead. He was crowned King of England on the 6th of January, 1066. This precarious situation meant that Harold would have to fight his 2 rivals in a series of battles throughout 1066, ending in October at the Battle of Hastings. Despite the name, the battle didn't take place in Hastings. The actual site was 8 miles north, close by what's now the town of Battle. I've come to the local museum to look at a copy of one of the most important sources of information about the Battle of Hastings, the Bayeux Tapestry. Made around 10 years after the battle, the original embroidery is 68 metres long and kept in the Normandy region of France. We're looking at a detailed watercolour copy dating from the early 19th century.
So here in the Museum of Battle, we've got this hand-painted copy of the Bayeux Tapestry. Very famous piece of artwork or historical documentation. I mean, either way, it's told us a lot about what we know went on at the Battle of Hastings today, has it?
Yeah. I mean, it's almost unique in the sense that you're getting a political commentary, really, and a military commentary of what occurred.
So who made it?
Most likely, it was Duke William's half-brother, Bishop Odo of Bayeux, who was also made Earl of Kent after the conquest, who was a particularly ambitious fellow. He actually appears in the tapestry almost as many times as his brother in various guises. And we think he commissioned it to be hung at his cathedral at Bayeux. They think it was more likely to have been embroidered in England, in Kent, at Canterbury probably.
So bearing in mind it was commissioned by those on the winning side of the Battle of Hastings, how accurate can we deem it to be, or is it just a very kind of forthright piece of propaganda from the Norman side? Do we know?
Well, we don't really know the answer to that, in the sense that the tapestry can be looked at lots of different ways, in the sense that it could be seen as a moral tale, you know, of a king breaking his oath. So here we see Harold returning back from Normandy, where he's had his meeting with Duke William and has pledged his oath to support William's claim to the throne of England upon the death of Edward. We can see Edward Confessor here, not possibly looking too happy about what's been said. We do see here Edward Confessor's sort of last moments, really. This looks like Harold having a conversation with the king about the future.
The hand outreached here.
Yes, the two hands are almost touching, aren't they? Edward was maybe saying, look, you know, forget what you told Duke William, I want you to take over when I die. Here he is being crowned, people looking on. Shortly afterwards, Halley's Comet appears in the sky.
This is Halley's Comet here?
Yeah, absolutely, this is Halley's Comet, yeah. You know, comets in those days were seen to be portents of great events, often portents of doom, and you can see that Harold is taking that sort of view of it, because he looks quite disturbed on getting the news of the comet's appearance, knowing that he's broken an oath, perhaps, to Duke William.
And that would be quite understandable for that side of the story to be told if this was being told from a Norman perspective.
This is absolutely the case, that's from the Norman perspective.
Harold Godwinson had seized the crown in an audacious power grab, and in doing so had immediately created two sworn enemies who believed the throne belonged to them. The first to invade was Viking leader Harald Hardrada, but things didn't go to plan. So confident were the Viking invaders as they arrived in the Yorkshire town of Stamford Bridge that they left their armour behind on their ships. This proved to be a fatal error, because the English caught them by surprise. Hardrada and around 6,000 of his men lost their lives.
Harold and his army had just seen off the Viking invasion at Stamford Bridge in Yorkshire. They then had to march more than 250 miles south to Hastings to face William of Normandy. That's about 16 miles a day, every day, for 16 days. Now, some of them would have been on horseback, but the Anglo-Saxon army was mainly made up of infantry. So just how hard would that march have been?
To find out, I'm meeting Lee Stewart, a former Royal Marine who served in Afghanistan. He's going to show me what Harold's army might have gone through on the march.
How are you, Rob?
Hey, good to meet you, mate.
Pleased to meet you.
How you going?
Yeah, not too bad, thank you, not too bad.
That looks like a fairly hefty pack you got on the back there.
Yeah, we've got about 85, 86 pound in there for you to have a go at.
Well, let's get me kitted up and then we'll...
let's go.
You can put me through my paces.
Just like soldiers today, it's thought that Harold's men had to carry heavy equipment throughout their mammoth journey south.
That's it, try and get it on.
I need to give that sweep.
Oh, swift movement.
Got it.
All right, you got it.
There we go. Cheers. So that's heavy. With this wind today as well, though,
Yeah.
slightly off balance, I'll be over.
Right. Yeah.
All right.
You ready
Yeah.
to go?
Yeah, let's
step
go.
off then.
All right. Okay. Typically, how far or how long might you be jumping with this for?
Often through the day, if it was light, good weather conditions, 12 to 15 miles. You stop and have rest periods, you'd eat, drink, sort your feet out, 'cause obviously your feet are going to end up in a bit of a bad way.
Yeah.
Some has their knees play up, some
Yeah.
others their hips, their shoulders. I think with me it was always my shoulders more than anything else.
Those Anglo-Saxon infantry who hiked all that distance would
Yeah.
have faced possibly very similar challenges.
Yeah, definitely, and if I'm being honest, it's probably a lot harder than we had it. We've got good quality boots that we get issued now.
Good point.
We've got good walking socks, whereas they wouldn't have had any of that. They'd have had the sandals and been expected to pretty much crack on. So a lot of the weight those guys had to carry, their chainmail, their swords, their shields, probably awkward to carry as well. I suppose we're lucky in a way that we had everything in our Bergens, still heavy, but a lot easier to carry.
And that's the thing, it's that mental strength, it's
Yeah.
that fatigue that you're going to be feeling.
Yeah.
But you've got to just wipe that, right?
Yeah, that's it. You've just got to try and ignore it and focus on what's going on.
I'm not sure how far we've done. Are they at least a kilometre? Not quite a mile.
Yeah.
I mean, that's nothing really, is it, though, in comparison? I might be able to get through 12, maybe 16 miles if
Yeah.
I absolutely had to.
Yeah.
The thing for me, though, that I'm pretty sure I wouldn't be able to do in my current state of fitness and conditioning is to be able to do that continuously, day after day
Yeah.
after day
Yeah.
after day.
That's where it comes in.
I would be completely
Yeah.
broken,
Yeah.
physically and mentally.
Yeah. I reckon if your life depended on it and your mates' lives depended on it, I think you could pull it out of the bag.
I'll take that, mate.
Well
Thank
done,
you,
mate. Well
buddy.
done.
That's a real eye-opener.
Brilliant, mate.
Setting that Bergen down and taking the weight off the shoulders is absolutely delightful. But thinking back to the Anglo-Saxon army, just a newfound respect for what they went through, carrying that weight, marching incessantly day after day to get the length of the country down to Hastings. And when they get there, they have to go into battle. They go into confrontation.
William of Normandy and his army arrived at Pevensey Beach on the 28th of September 1066 and marched to Hastings, turning it into their stronghold. It took King Harold and his army of around 7,000 men just over a fortnight to arrive from Yorkshire on October the 13th, 1066. As the Anglo-Saxons set up camp 8 miles north of the Norman army, they were spotted by Duke William's scouts. Word got back to him and he gathered his forces to march north and meet them. 14,000 Norman and Anglo-Saxon soldiers were now primed and ready. To investigate the Battle of Hastings in more detail, I'm meeting medieval historian Roy Porter.
This feels a bit like Harold coming to meet William.
The confronting armies, yeah. Hi,
Good
how
to
are
meet
you?
you.
And you.
I mean, this is some sight. This is a very special field, this, isn't it?
It's a very special field. It's part of the battlefield of Hastings, where this great conflict was fought on the 14th of October 1066.
Each side had roughly the same numbers of men, but they were very different armies.
Let's talk about the Anglo-Saxon army then. Who was that army made up from, do we know?
Okay, well, at the core of the army, you have the king and his housecarls. And there's no such thing as a professional army in 1066, but they're the people who essentially are the military leaders of the age. They're the people who can be kitted out in the best armour, for example. But the mainstay of the army has been called up in 1066, and this is something called the Fyrd, F-Y-R-D.
The Fyrd.
Okay. Local farmers, for example, people of all ages as well, ranging from youths to much older men. You'll have people from the local population who have been called up to fight on this occasion.
Were they voluntary, or had they been forced
there's
to fight?
there's an expectation that, when the call goes out, that you will go with your local lord to a place like this. We're told by one of the sources the English army fought valiantly on account of their love of their country.
Wow.
So that's in a Norman source. That's identified as being something which fired them up.
I think I'm quite surprised that at that lower level there was a national pride.
I enjoy that a lot. I find that quite fascinating.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and it comes out on a very visceral level on the sort of day of the battle. You know, we're told that the soldiers of Howe's army are shouting "Oot, oot, oot, out, out, out" at the approaching forces of Duke William.
At approximately 9 a.m., William's troops made the first move.
And the battle begins really with the Norman archers and crossbowmen shooting at the Anglo-Saxon lines in an attempt really to soften them up.
Harold's army was determined to defend their land, but they faced one of the most feared armies in Europe. The Normans not only had infantry, but powerful cavalry and skilled archers as well. I'm meeting leading expert on medieval weaponry, Magnus Sigurdsson Hardradi.
Magnus, hello.
Hello, how are you?
Oh, I'm good. It's toasty in here, isn't it?
Magnus gives lectures on vintage battle armaments and makes realistic replicas for films and TV.
Right, so we're going to make an arrowhead here.
Yes.
And this is how they would have been making arrowheads back at the 13th century.
It's estimated that William had more than 1,000 archers in his army. To say that his blacksmiths had their work cut out is an understatement.
Can you see how that's starting to form the socket?
How long might it have taken, do you think, to form an arrowhead?
I'd have thought it would take them the same amount of time as me, probably less. And I can do a basic bodkin point in 8-9 minutes.
One more. There it is. That's all you need.
That's all you need.
So now we're going to start working the actual arrowhead itself, are we, the points?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
This has been going since Roman times.
And the Norman archers firing across the Anglo-Saxons would possibly have been using arrowheads like this.
The bodkin arrowhead is a 4-sided iron spike. Its unique shape meant it had 4 cutting edges, making it the perfect weapon for penetrating armour.
It's too cold now. You can feel it, can't you?
Yeah, I can. You can hear it as well. Oh,
Can you see how long that's getting?
cracked it.
Where?
Way down through the middle.
Ah, they'll be fine. It's a fire and forget.
All right. It's fire and forget. We can get right over the crack. This is just one arrowhead. In an army, you need hundreds, thousands of these, and it's a one-time use. For me, there's something very special about seeing how this is made, because this brings in a whole new, excuse the pun, a whole new army of people, an army of blacksmiths who were needed to supply the soldiers at the front line with the weapons they needed. But no one talks about them. There you go. Look at that. You can imagine the amount of damage that is going to do if it's coming at you off the end of a Norman bow.
Time to see these arrows in action and to find out how effective they would have been.
What you've got here is your sort of early medieval longbow, based on sort of Viking ones, so the Normans being sort of Viking descendants would have had them, the Anglo-Saxons would have had them. It's got a draw weight of between 70 and 90 pounds, which is what we know they used at the time from finds that we've had, and the size of the arrow socket.
Well, here's the arrow as well, and that's...
Pretty similar to what you...
That tip there is very similar to what we just knocked up on the forge, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's slightly more refined than the one I smashed up.
You're about to see what it would actually do.
To flesh.
Yeah. Good luck.
Oh, I'm pretty pleased with that, man.
That's quite impressive.
Let's look out. I mean, I didn't have to load that up much on the bow at all.
No.
Look, the arrowhead's right inside. That's completely gone. That's disappeared, look. How deep?
Right,
Oh,
so
that
it's
went in
gone
more
in.
than I thought. That's a good couple of inches there, isn't it?
Did you notice how easy it went in? It just slides in. There's no real problem.
Whoa, I don't know how I feel about that. I feel a bit funny about that, because I know what we're talking about. You know, and it's because it's so long ago, it's easy to just go, you know, arrows were fired, people died. when you start bringing it to life like this, arrows were fired, people died, and they were, you know, they were humans like me and you, and they died in the most horrific way.
Slowly in a lot of cases.
During the Battle of Hastings, the skilled Norman archers tried to smash the Anglo-Saxon shield wall. In spite of their aerial onslaught, the Anglo-Saxons stood their ground against their better-equipped Norman opponents. But they had more than just arrows in their arsenal.
To find out what the Normans had in their armoury, I've come to meet a real-life, modern-day Norman knight.
Dan Fitz-Edward is an armoury expert who studied Norman weaponry.
Dan, how you doing?
Hi, nice to meet you.
Got here. I mean, it feels like I've walked into a Norman camp here, actually.
Yeah, I mean, it gives us quite the impression of what would look like if you have a bunch of Normans sitting around waiting for the fight, really.
So tell me a little bit about some of the weaponry. God, look at this, some of the weaponry that Normans would have had then there at Battle of Hastings.
Well, obviously, the thing you picked out first is the sword. This
Yes.
is the one that everyone wants to see first.
It's very attractive.
It is.
Kind of a feel. See
Absolutely. These were actually very expensive at the time. These cost somewhere in the range of sort of a modern sports car.
That's lovely. Okay.
The sword we've got sort of almost the most expensive. Now, this is what you're looking at for your poorer men. Simple axe from home, something that they've used to split wood. This wasn't necessarily designed exclusively for fighting.
But you'd still do damage.
It makes up for it in brutality. Right, so the one weapon we haven't really looked at is the humble spear. Well, this is the weapon everyone would have one of. And the big advantage is you don't have to be too close to your opponent. And if you're trying to keep a formation together, the motions you need to stab with a spear doesn't really disrupt the formation as much, so you can stay quite close together. So this is the weapon that the Saxon third would rely on when wanting to stop a Norman knight.
How much of a feared fighting force were the Normans?
They had a very ferocious reputation. Their sort of initial startup was the King of France at the time to try and stop Viking raids, gave them a part of northern France.
There are Viking roots then within the Normans?
Yeah, and because they're quite a small duchy, they have to fight to survive. And it says a lot about the Normans that despite them being small and vulnerable and perched on the north of France, they not only survived, they thrived. And one of the ways they did that was if they went to war with you, they meant serious business.
And what about William, Duke of Normandy? How much do we know about him as a leader of these men?
This is a guy who has fought and led armies for most of his life, so he's an incredibly experienced commander. He has a reputation for ruthlessness. He very much had the reputation that if you angered him or provoked him, he would come for you because he couldn't have it any other way. His men wouldn't follow him if they thought he'd become weak.
So he talks about a lot of the offensive, the attacking weaponry. Well, what about the defensive kit that the Normans had?
The key one that we should really start with is the shield. This is an item that nearly every man on the field at Hastings would have.
So Normans and Saxons?
Most of both sides are equipped with these. The obvious reason being that when you hold it correctly, this covers pretty much the entirety of your left side, starting up here with the bottom of your face and stretching all the way down to your leg. So to the average infantryman, this is life. This is the most important piece of gear.
Big fan of the shield, Dan. But like a magpie, I have noticed some shinier objects over here.
So let's drop this helmet on.
Yeah.
And straight away what you'll notice is that nasal bar, it sits just at the point in your vision where it doesn't really interfere with anything.
It doesn't, do you know what? I thought that would interfere with vision. It doesn't at all. It's straight round it.
But the most important thing is, we now swing in and attack your face. That's right in the way for most of the lines that we try and attack you. So no matter what we do, this is usually going to get in the way.
Goodness me, I think I'd probably still be in shock seeing a sword come at my face.
A key part of the Norman army's defence was their armoured clothing. They called these metal shirts hauberks, and we know them better as chainmail.
Oh, that is a lot heavier than I thought it would be.
Around about the 3 to 4 stone mark.
I don't think I have worn full chainmail before. Can we do something about that?
I think we're going to have to.
Come on, I want to get this on if we can.
Right.
All right, let's get kitted up.
Chainmail isn't quick or easy to put on. But if I'd been on the battlefield in 1066, I'd have been glad of the protection.
The main thing was, it stopped you being cut. And that was a big thing to the medieval man because infection is rife. Broken bones, they were really good at setting, but once a cut had turned septic, everyone was susceptible to that.
The final touch, the all-important helmet.
This is it. This is Norman Rob.
And so it's onto the battlefield for a medieval combat lesson.
This is every little boy's dream come true, especially this little boy's dream come true. Dress as a Norman knight with a sword in the middle of a field, having a fight.
Oh, that's it. That's why I'm here. Grown ups for other people. You try and swing at me. Feel free wherever you want to hit me.
Okay. I'm trying to be clever, but I'm not getting. Aha.
Now, the other lesson is the second you bring your arm out from behind that shield, it's now a vulnerable point.
Yep.
So every time you make a blow, you've got to be ready to receive a blow. So you want to try and find a way to attack that exposes the least most of your arm as you can get away with.
Yeah, okay, so almost my shield follows my sword.
Absolutely. So if you make that blow again, raising your shield slightly as you do it,
yeah.
now all of a sudden, that's the shot that nearly got you,
Yeah.
and yours is the shot that brings down your opponent.
It's a lot to think about.
If you attack my face, which direction's my shield going to go?
It's going to go up.
Right, so if my shield's going up, what's going to be exposed?
I'm going to go for your shin.
Absolutely. So now what you've got to do is plan a series of movements that will start like this, and the second my shield comes up, you flick and go straight down for the back of my ankle.
Right.
So begin that attack on my face.
Okay.
Perfect.
Right, come on then, let's have a sword fight.
So all of a sudden you start to go, if I go there, he goes there.
Hey, that's horrible.
It's not quite the Battle of Hastings, but after just a few minutes, I'm knackered.
The responsiveness is gone now.
Yeah, you start to,
I've just not got.
you tell your arm to go there and you suddenly find it sluggish on the return.
To get round, yeah.
But that's why as well, when you imagine this infantry fight, a lot of it is stood staring at each other,
Yeah.
waiting for them to move first. And then you have the domino effect. So you imagine when you were attacking me, you expose your arm.
Yeah, every time, I knew
Second
it.
you do it, one guy in this line goes, I'll get his arm. Second they expose their arm, another guy in your line sees that, makes a shot for it. So you'd have almost staring matches, then one person makes a shot, and there's 30 seconds of frenetic energy as everyone makes a shot at each other.
The idea of spending the day fighting to the death in cold, muddy conditions just boggles the mind.
All of a sudden, when you think about fighting for 8 hours, it changes your perspective on the whole thing.
Horrendous. I mean, yeah. I think it's time for a cup of tea or something. Just
Probably a coffee.
maybe just get this chainmail off. Exhausted.
As tired as I am, I'd have been much worse off without my shield. For the Anglo-Saxons, shields offered more than just protection. They became an integral part of their battle strategy, as historian Roy Porter explains.
We know a lot about what happened on the day of the battle because there are lots of descriptions of it. And the interesting thing is that all these descriptions describe one major thing, which is that the army of Harold was static. It stayed still behind the shield wall. You stand in close formation with your shields interlocked, so they present what you hope is going to be an impenetrable barrier to the enemy.
Yeah.
So you've got our shields in front of us. Are you left-handed or right-handed?
I'm right-handed. I'll go
Okay,
left.
so there you've got our shields interlocked, yeah, and this is what you're using to sort of lunge through, and it's this shield which is going to be used to try and repel anybody coming towards us. The firm impression you get is that for as long as that line stood firm, it was impossible for William to arrive at a quick victory.
Harold's army were disciplined and fended off wave after wave of attacks, but they also fought back and killed many of William's soldiers.
It seems likely that amongst some of William's army, the rumour goes around that William himself has been killed. And it may well be that at that point, some of of William's army start to flee. You see one man flee and you think, well, I'm going to go. And then other people go, and suddenly the whole army is turned from a fighting force into a crowd, really. William appears before his fleeing men, takes off his helmet to show that he's still alive. So the question is then, how do Harold's troops take advantage of that? If they pursue the Normans, they're losing their position on the hill, and also they're losing their formation. So really, all that Harold can do is to try and hope that his troops hold their position up here. But some of the accounts suggest that that doesn't happen. At least some of Harold's men come down off the hill. And of course, once they come down off the hill, they've lost their advantage and they're no longer in their tight formation, and they're quite vulnerable if the Normans are able to rally. And they are able to rally.
As the Anglo-Saxon shield wall broke up, the Normans took the opportunity to kill any soldiers who came their way. For Harold, the battle was going from bad to worse. And then, something remarkable happened. In accordance with the chivalric codes of the era, they all stopped for lunch. But what would those armies have eaten for sustenance?
We do know that they had basic army rations, and they possibly would have had hardtack biscuits. So this is a hardtack biscuit, as you can see. It's pretty hard.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah. So they were sort of twice baked. You see these little holes let out all the moisture. That was really important, that you didn't get any moisture in them.
And carb.
No, toothbreaker.
Flour and water, is that?
Flour and water, yeah. They wouldn't have had salt then. Salt was a luxury item.
No butter?
No, nothing like that. Oh, I think you can probably tell that.
When it came to the Battle of Hastings, we know that it went on pretty much all day. They must have had to eat. They must have had to take in fuel to sustain themselves for that long.
Yes, and we need to remember that they did bring their wives and their children with them. So it's more than likely that the good women folk would have been back in camp preparing something, a very simple stew, you know, with those basic army rations.
So we've got all the veg that we need here.
Yep, these are your basic, your staples.
That looks like a good...
It's a good pot.
Good.
So they probably wouldn't have spent a huge amount of time chopping and peeling. Parsnip, you see, would also have been a very early sweetener.
Oh, it is just...
Yep.
Get it all in.
Leeks, throw them all in.
This isn't far off what a vegetable stew would be these days.
Medieval England really was a vegetarian society,
Okay.
you know, unless you had a lot of money.
Right, so you just need a bit of...
Yep.
A bit of juice, a bit of water.
A bit of water.
Let's
Put
get
it all
there.
in.
Right, well, here's
Wow.
our pot.
Yep.
Raw stew. We've got a nice roaring fire here.
Yes,
Let's pop that over the
perfect.
top there. I hope
That
that's
looks
gonna-
brilliant.
Now, there, it's going nowhere. Oh, lovely. So a nice vegetable stew is what we think the Anglo-Saxons would have eaten on their battle.
Yeah.
Do we know what the Normans might have been eating?
Oh, well, they were very canny. They bought huge caravans of cattle. There are amazing scenes depicted in the Bayeux tapestry of this grand feast the night before the battle. They've got makeshift ovens, they've got spits, and they would have had, you know, nice wines and French food.
That was quite typical of the Norman culture, was it then? To eat well, to drink well.
They drank wine in a civilised way with their meals. The flip side of that was that the Anglo-Saxons would have drank vast quantities of ale, and there is a theory to suggest that the night before they drank, you know, far too much, and that possibly had an impact on how they performed the next day in battle.
It just goes to show how important food and diet and, you know, that preparation for battle was, and food is a huge part of that.
After the Norman conquest, food and culture changed so much. You know, we started to eat very differently, you know, we started to drink very differently.
I find that quite fascinating, that a lot of the foods that we enjoy today that we probably just assume is, well, this is what we eat, this is part of our culture, and it's come to this country because of the Battle of Hastings.
I believe it was the beginning of a much grander golden era that we should really embrace and think about that amazing relationship that we did have, you know, with France.
I think that's fascinating.
It is really fascinating.
Halfway through the Battle of Hastings, both the Anglo-Saxon and Norman soldiers stopped for lunch. The break gave Duke William a chance to reflect on the battle so far. Having seen the effect his retreating troops had on breaking open the Anglo-Saxon shield wall, he decided to adopt it as a deliberate tactic.
This famous event where you have a feigned retreat by William's forces, and we're told that part of Harold's line runs down the slope, following what they perceive as fleeing Normans, and the forces turn around and then can cut down the English because they're no longer in a line behind their shields. They can be taken out one by one, hunted down and wiped out. So it's when you lose that discipline that you have one of the critical moments of the battle.
Of course, that's the chance that the Norman cavalry are waiting for. And it's likely that it's in that final part of the fighting, in the end game of the battle, that Harold is killed.
With their king dead, the Anglo-Saxons lost the will to fight on. As the battle came to an end, 10,000 bodies littered the hillside. the manner of King Harold's death has since become a much debated topic.
Of course, there's this traditional story that he's hit with an arrow in the eye. But actually, the early sources don't say that. They say, in fact, that he was cut down, he was cut to pieces. The Bayeux tapestry shows this figure with an arrow in his eye. But we need to bear in mind that the Bayeux tapestry that we see today is not necessarily the Bayeux tapestry of the 11th century, because it's had large numbers of restorations. And we have a bit of an idea what the Bayeux tapestry looked like prior to the 19th century restorations, because a chap did an engraving of it. And when you look at that, the figure with an arrow in his eye isn't got an arrow at all. In fact, he's holding some form of javelin. And it's almost certain that it's the figure to the right of that who's falling down with an axe, who's having his thigh cut by a mounted horseman, who is Harold.
So why would the tapestry have been changed?
I think that the arrow in the eye is a bit of a literary device, really. You have other examples of it in medieval literature, and it was sort of symbolic of a judgment of God, really, on somebody, that God directs the arrow and it hits Harold. So it's sort of saying that Harold broke his oath, that Harold is some form of sinner, some form of traitor, and therefore this is the judgment that he receives.
King Harold's manner of death isn't the only point that's hotly debated by historians. So is the location of the battle itself. Most believe that it took place at Senlac Hill, just outside the town of Battle.
Well, we're standing on the north side of Senlac Hill at the moment. Battle Abbey is 100 yards in that direction. I think that this is such a strong position that really you didn't actually have to be a great military genius to pick it. You know, it's got everything, and I think it would have been quite obvious to most soldiers that this would be a good place to fight a defensive battle. You've got the high ground, so you command the area. You've got the advantage of the slope. You've got the boggy areas down on all sides, which really protected Harold's army from any kind of flanking attacks. And you can probably see it's very, very boggy underfoot even now, even up on this high ground. So it's as good as it gets, really.
The surviving written and anecdotal evidence may point to Senlac Hill being the battle site, but with no archaeological finds to back this up, some scholars have other theories. Historian John Grean favours a site just northeast of Senlac Hill. Could this be the true location of the Battle of Hastings?
We're on the top of Colbeck Hill, which was the assembly point of the English army. Not only is this the highest point in the area with good views all round, it was also a very well-known meeting point where three districts met at the top of the hill. The only contemporary account that we have, which is the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, states that William came against Harold at the hoar apple tree, which is right here. Hoar or hoary means white or grey-white. So it's an old apple tree. We must remember that in the days before maps, places had to be identified by certain features. And an old apple tree on the top of a barren, open hillside would be a very identifiable spot. The severity of the slope meant that the shield wall that could be formed by the English army was virtually impenetrable. The main weapon of the Normans were their knights, mounted cavalry. And for them to be effective against a solid shield wall, they needed impetus. They needed to be able to reach a gallop and crash into the ranks of the English warriors. Now, on the site behind Battle Abbey, the ground is flat enough for full gallop to be achieved. Here, as you can see from the terrain, it wasn't possible.
Victorious, Duke William marched his men to London, and on Christmas Day 1066, he was crowned King of England. He set about transforming the Anglo-Saxon way of life to reflect Norman culture. He also ordered the construction of an abbey at the battlefield to commemorate his victory. I'm meeting historian Michael Carter to find out how the great structure of Battle Abbey is linked to the spot where King Harold died.
Hi, how do you do?
Good to meet you.
Good, likewise.
Here we are. We have Battle Abbey right behind us here now.
Yeah.
How certain can we be that this is the exact site of the battle?
This is the most important evidence we have of the Battle of Hastings, to be perfectly honest.
How so? Why is that?
Because you never ever found a monastery on top of a hill unless you had a very good reason for it. And that's because on top of a hill you don't have a natural water supply. And the monks know that from the moment they arrive here, and they don't like it one bit.
All right, we'll come up into the arches. Well, what's the significance of this part of the
Well, we're
monastery,
basically looking at a pit underneath the monastic latrines, under the monastic loos, and waste from up above would have dropped down here. But unlike most other monastic latrines, there would be no water supply here flushing it through.
Because we're on top of a hill?
Absolutely, we're on no hill, and this doesn't have a natural water supply. And the monks whinge about this when they first arrive here in the late 11th century. They know there's no water here, and this is going to cause problems. And it really does throughout the Middle Ages. And the Abbey's accounts, I've found several references to this in the Abbey's financial accounts, of regular payments being made for what they called a scouring of the latrines. That basically means mucking them out by hand.
The fact that there was no running water here meant that this wasn't an ideal place for a monastery. It was built here for much bigger reasons than architectural or because of its landscape.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the monks don't want to build it here. They want to build it in a nice, convenient valley bottom where they've got running water. They are told to build it here by the conqueror, and sources within living memory of the Battle of Hastings say it was built here because it was on the spot where William had won his great victory over Harold.
Oh, look at this. It's a beautifully impressive space, Michael, in here.
It absolutely is. This gives you an idea of the enduring legacy of William the Conqueror's extraordinary generosity to the monks here, that they were able to build on a scale like this. The monks had to shift enormous amounts of earth to terrace the site on which to build their monastery. And actually, as an aside for that, that probably removed at a very, very early day a lot of the physical evidence of the battle, you know, the bits of broken armour, horse trappings and things like that.
Are there more focal points within the Abbey that you think point to the commemoration of the battle?
The most important building in any monastery was the church, and we've got to go there.
Where are we headed? I'm assuming that's up, is it?
That's up,
all right.
Yeah.
Well, let's take
Stairway to heaven.
Very good.
Sadly, in 1538, during King Henry VIII's dissolution of the monasteries, the church was completely destroyed.
You can see in the landscaping around that they've appeared to have set out where the church once was. Is that right?
Yeah, archaeological excavations found the foundations of the church. But standing, it would have been the very holiest part of the 11th century church. And just in front of us, we have a plaque marking the site of the Abbey's high altar. Now, the location of the high altar at Battle Abbey is of huge significance to the events that took place here at the Battle of Hastings.
That last line on this plaque here, is it?
Yep. Very early sources mention that the high altar was sited on the very spot where Harold had fallen.
How confident are we that that is the case?
I mean, monks are very, very great recorders of things. They're our most important sources for history in the Middle Ages. And it's a source within living memory of the Battle of Hastings that's saying it's taking place. So as far as you can trust any medieval evidence, that's pretty darn good. And I think there's a very, very deep spiritual reason why the high altar is also located there as well, because we're talking about an extraordinarily violent death and part of a day of unimaginable horror in which thousands of people on both sides were killed. And people knew that if they had committed acts of violence, they were going to have to pay for it. And not just pay for it financially, they paid for it spiritually. And the foundation here of Battle Abbey was a way of making good for the blood shed here on the 14th of October, 1066.
As for Harold, no one's quite sure what happened to his body. One theory is that his remains were finally laid to rest at Waltham Abbey.
Even today, we can't escape the influence of the Normans. From their cathedrals to their castles, reminders of their legacy can still be found across the length and breadth of this country.